Hello and welcome to this Silverstripe screencast. This episode is going to be about data relationships in Silverstripe, and we're going to be talking about the has-many relation. So far we've been dealing with content that is directly associated with a page, but oftentimes pages are made up of content that is stored outside the page and merely brought in to the page through a data relationship. We saw a bit of this in lesson 7 when we created a has-one relationship to file objects. All of that information about the file is stored in its own table, and the page merely references it via ID. So we're going to dig a bit deeper into relational data in this lesson by introducing a plural relationship with has-many. So let's just go over what we're going to cover. First, we'll create a generic data object, and as we talked about before, data objects are what you use when you have database content that isn't necessarily a page. And then we'll set up that has-many relationship. And then we'll go on to introduce the grid field. Grid field is how we're going to manage those related records. And lastly, we're going to pull that related data into the template. So let's create a generic data object. We'll look at the new arrival in our static directory in our theme. It's called regionspage.html. Our designer has once again stripped away all of the Chrome and left us with just the layout section. So before we go any further, let's migrate this page into a Silverstripe template. So we'll copy the contents of the regionspage.html into a new file in our templates layout directory, and we'll call it regionspage.ss. And of course, to get this template to work, we have to have a page type to go with it. So we'll create a regionspage.php in MySite code, and we'll just leave both of these classes empty. So we've seen all this before. This is just creating a basic page type. Now we'll run dev build !flush and see that we get a new page type. And once that's finished, we'll go into the CMS, we'll find the regions page and just go into settings and change the page type to regions page. Now, if we go back to the website and click on regions, we should now see the new layout. Now, all this is still static content, of course, so we have to start carving it up into something that's editable in the CMS. One of the most apparent features of this content is that it clearly belongs in a loop. We see the regions northeast, southeast, etc., and they all have the same structure and data. They've got a title, a photo, and a short description. Now we could hand this off to the rich text editor and create all this content in that $content block, but wow, that would be pretty ugly, right? Our content editor would have to take care to create very specific markup, and that would push the boundaries of the WYSIWYG utility. It wouldn't be very fun anymore. So we need to make each of these regions editable pieces of structured data in the CMS. So let's first create the region data type. Like we discussed in the previous lesson, generic non-page content types should be a subclass of data object. So I'm just going to add in the basic fields here. We have a title, description, and we have a photo, and that of course is a has-one, as we saw in a previous lesson. And this is all typical stuff that we saw before. I'm not doing anything new here, just a text field, a text area field, and then a simple upload field that will enforce image uploads and upload it to a custom folder. Now you may have noticed that our getCMS fields function looks a bit different, and that's because we're not going to be using the typical page editing interface for this object. So we're not going to have all the tabs that come with page objects. We could very easily create a tabbed interface, but since this data type is so simple, we're going to leave it as a simple field list and add all of the fields to the field set constructor. And they're all just comma separated, a list of arguments, and you can just keep going with that and adding fields that way. So now that we have our standalone region object, we're going to set up a has-many relationship, and this is to say we're going to relate it to the regions page. We know from our design that the page can contain any number of regions, so for this we'll use the has-many relationship. So really simple here. It follows the same convention as the has-one that we used in a previous lesson. The key regions is the arbitrary name that we'll give to the relationship. This is the method that we'll use to get a list of all the related regions. And the value region is the name of the related class. So we'll run dev build and we'll see if we get any database changes. If you don't see any, that is the expected result. Why? Well, we're not quite done yet. Has many relationships are a bit of a special case because they have to be reciprocated by the related class. So while every regions page has many regions, it's also true that every region has one regions page that contains it. So regions cannot belong to any more than one region page. Once a region has been claimed, it can't be associated with any other parent. So this is really important because the database mutation happens at the has one level, not the has many. What will really bind these two objects together is a region object providing one and only one regions page ID. So let's make that update now. So we'll just go into our has one and we'll just set regions page, regions page. Typically in a reciprocal has one like this, you can just name it after the parent class. Now let's run dev build and we'll see that we get a new regions page ID on the region object. All right, let's talk about grid field. We've now got our has many relationship defined and our has one on the other side. So we're ready to start populating the relationship with data. For this, we need one of the workhorses of the CMS interface. It's called grid field. Now you see grid field all over the CMS. It's in the files section. It's in the security section when you're managing users. If you use the list view in the main CMS area, editing pages, that's a grid field. Anytime you're seeing a list of data in columns, that's it. So needless to say, it's all over the CMS and it's used in many different ways. Grid field is a highly configurable form field that allows you to manage just arbitrary tables of data. In its most primitive sense, you can think of it as an abstraction of a database table, but there's much more that you can do with it. To manage our region objects, we want a tab on the regions page that allows us to create, read, edit, and delete associated region records. So let's make the following update to our regions page object. So I've created a grid field here, and there's a lot to this constructor, so let's just walk through it piece by piece. So the first argument, regions, is a required arbitrary name for the grid field. It's just like all your other form fields, you have to give them a name. And you'll only need this if you ever want to make updates to your grid field after you've added it to the field list. But it is required, so just come up with something that's alphanumeric and no spaces, etc. And also unique. The second argument, regions on this page, is a title for the grid field, so this should be pretty user-friendly, and it's just going to sit there in the top of the table and let the user know what they're doing. The third argument, this regions, this is the most substantial part of the grid field because it populates the grid with data. In this case, we're using the magic method created by our has many relationship to fill the grid with all the records that are currently associated with this page. So this regions, it's calling the many named regions and getting all of the related records. The fourth argument, the grid field config record editor, this is a bit more complex. It's creating an object that contains a number of grid field component objects, which provide various UI tools to the grid. Pagination, an add new button, delete and edit buttons. These are all grid field config objects that can be configured with any variety of components you like. But Silverstripe ships with a few common configurations that are often used. Grid field config record editor, this is a great one because it provides all the basic UI you'd expect to have for managing data. Now, if we wanted a custom set of UI tools, we would just use grid field config without the record editor part of the class and just create something and pass it an array of grid field components. Not often you'll want to do something like that, but if you want to really customize your grid field, that's where you want to be. So let's go back into the CMS and edit our regions page. And we see that we now have a tab that contains a grid. Let's try it out and add some test records here. Now let's see about tweaking the grid field a little bit to make it more user-friendly. One of the most common customizations you'll want to make to your grid is the columns that are displayed. In this case, there are only a handful of fields, so showing title and description, not so bad. But imagine that your data object has 10 distinct fields. You don't want 10 columns showing to the user. We probably want to tighten that up a bit. So in our case, let's make a minor enhancement and just add the photo field to our list view. So every row here will get a nice photo to represent the region. Now by default, only fields in the DB array get included. Since our photo is in the has one, we have to specifically include it. Let's define a new variable in our region object called summary_fields. This array maps the name of the field to a human readable column name. We'll let the photo speak for itself and leave its column header empty. Now, because we changed a private static variable, we need to run $flush to see the update to the grid. So, how does it look? Pretty bad, right? The photo's not being resized, so that's a big problem. It's just blowing up the grid. So fortunately, summary fields accepts more than just plain field names. We can actually provide any public method on our data object as a column value. So let's create a method that returns a resized photo. Now in this method, we introduce a new concept, this exists method. We'll talk about this a bit later, but basically you're just making sure that there's actually data in that photo relationship. So if we have a photo, we return a resized photo using setWidth. If not, we're going to return a nice piece of text saying there's just no image. Also notice that Silverstripe automatically resolves the getAccessor method. So we can just say grid thumbnail in our summary fields, and it will automatically resolve to get grid thumbnail. Just a little bit cleaner. So we'll run the $flush again, and we see that the grid looks much cleaner now. Now we could have saved ourselves a lot of time by using a method that Silverstripe provides to all image objects by default called CMS_thumbnail. So photo.cmsThumbnail would have achieved a very similar result. I'm not sure the dimensions are the same. I don't know if it's 100 or not, but the only thing it wouldn't have done is given us this fallback text. So really I'm just doing this as a proof of concept to show that we can use custom getters to provide fields to the grid. Now you may have noticed that I just mentioned photo.cmsThumbnail. And that's another great feature of summary fields, is that you can traverse relationships to get methods in foreign fields using this dot-separated syntax. So suppose we wanted to just show the file name of the photo. Not really likely, but just to show how this would work, we could actually use photo.filename, and it would just get that property of the photo. So this type of syntax becomes especially useful when you're formatting dates. You can use your date.nice or whatever. Or if you're getting the title of a related has1, a has1 is just going to show you the ID by default. So if you want to traverse that relationship and get the title of the has1 that you're relating to, that's more useful for a grid. So pretty flexible. Okay, so now that we've got the relation set up and we've got some content in the CMS, let's bring it into the template. This should be pretty straightforward. Let's go into regions_page.ss, and we'll just open a loop called regions. Now $regions refers to the has many relationship we created on that page, and it's going to get us all the related region records. And just like we've done before, we're going to pull off all the properties of those region objects. And do take note that I'm skipping over the links for now, and I'm going to leave those hashtags in there. We'll deal with linking these in a later tutorial. Okay, now let's just refresh the browser and see that the regions are displaying as expected. And we see that they are. That's it for this tutorial. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below.